Well, while we're waiting for this, I would like to report that that picture I took of all of you earlier, I sent it to my wife. She showed it to the kids, who were shocked at how many people were here to listen to their dad and wanted to know if I was scared. And I started to type back that none of them were biters, and then I realized I should wait until the end of the day to make sure that that's the case. So I haven't responded yet. But okay, so who are you calling stale? Is the title of this section. Who do we want to take this? We didn't actually discuss who was going to do the talking here. Oh, okay, I'll start. So these are the numbers as of lunchtime today. Hopefully nobody's opened any issues since that point, but on Radu's slide earlier, you mentioned the number of issues we had. It wasn't quite up to date. You hadn't updated your slides this morning, disappointingly. We had 372 issues open. We do try to add tags to issues. We don't have anybody dedicated to that, which I think we'll get into later. But we have a lot of tag names, and the three of us approaching this session wanted to make those tags better and make them easier for everybody to understand, both you and for us. So we actually ended up deleting 10 of them and renaming a bunch, so we have a bunch of tags there. A lot of the issues are obsolete, and nobody's tested them because that's a lot of issues. Some are unverified. The oldest one in there goes all the way back to April 2012. It was carried over from SourceForge when we moved the project from SourceForge. The newest was from Friday, and that is one of the ones that's unverified. Nobody's had time to go in and see if it's really an issue yet. So how we manage issues today. Yeah, they're left unassigned until someone decides to work on it. That's often the way of open source. We do have a good first issue tag or label that Jarno added some years ago as a way for people who want to get involved with the project to find something that might be easier to implement, and they can go in there and try it. We haven't had a lot of uptake on that. This release, I think over the 3.1 hotfixes and in this release, we ended up fixing a lot of those. They were not terribly urgent things, which is why they hadn't been done in a long time, but several of those have shipped now. I know my personal way of managing issues tends to be, I look at the issues page and it says we have 15 pages worth of issues, and I'll say, okay, why don't I check page 7 and see if there's anything interesting to work on? So, it's, yeah, it's not a good way to manage issues. I don't know if either of you have a different way you like to approach them.
I usually start browsing the pages, and then I close the tab.
That's another way to manage, yes.
So I think my prime approach is something doesn't work like I think it does. I seem to recall that I opened an issue for this a few years ago, and then I go looking for it. And then I discover that there are several that are related. And then my impulse is to close the tag, but I usually end up trying to do something with it. But yeah, there's a lot of issues in there, and so when you go to create one or find one, there's a lot to sift through.
A lot to go through, and sometimes even a year after something has been opened, I'll look at it, and then I'll discover that it was opened a year ago, but it was a duplicate of something opened 5 years ago. And for a long time, Eero was really, really on top of the issues. Pretty much as soon as they came in, he would check them out, and he had an amazing memory for the older ones that were already in the repo. And so a lot of them were quickly closed at that point. But
one of the reasons was that whenever he took an issue to verify, he actually wrote a sort of like a unit test for it, or some sort of test set, and saved it into a Git repo, where you were able to find the source files that you can use to reproduce those. Naturally, it would be nice if every issue creator would create those for us, and then automatically those would be verified, as we don't have that automation. And then many people who are not coders might not know how to write small test cases that reproduce that one small thing.
So one of the things we thought about would be nice to show here would be a burn down chart. Over time, this is how many issues we have. This is how many get addressed. Because we do have a lot of hot fixes. We do ship a lot of fixes. So things, it's not like this number just keeps growing and growing and never gets addressed. But realistically, if we presented that chart, which we don't have a good way to collect the data, there's not a good way to look at GitHub and have that tracker based on the info that they give us, it would still be a burn up chart because we're not addressing them as fast as they come in, because you see most of the developers up here right now, as was mentioned earlier. And again, as with open source, any open source project, the ones that will get fixed tend to be the ones that are of interest to the developers, or have some reason to work on it. And there can be an issue in there that I think looks interesting, but it's going to take days worth of work and redesign a big portion of the toolkit, and so huge headache. And my employer will not appreciate me spending time on that unless it's actually of use to our customers. So that's the way of open source. Again, this is how we tend to search for things in the backlog. Look at how many people there are and show me the one with the red hat, or the orange hat, or the orange shirt. It's not easy to find things in there now. There's so much there. So obviously the solution is to just close stuff, right? Yes? Yes, okay, I'm getting a few nods, that's good. Okay, so we're gonna close down the issues tracker and, oh no. So yeah, we do have this problem. This is not a problem that's unique to us. A lot of projects have it, not just open source, but a lot of open source projects have it. The backlogs are messy, but we don't have dedicated people to go through them. So yeah, Eero was helpful for a long time. Radu's helped tag a lot of issues, but if you look recently, as we've been focused on getting the release out and preparing for this conference, I think anything that's come in over the last 2 weeks, nobody's looked at or tagged, pretty much.
Wasn't there an issue that came in very, very
Yes.
recently with regard to table borders?
Yes, there was. I don't know that it was tagged, but it was fixed. Yes. So our goal is to reduce the backlog to something manageable, because if your backlog is at a manageable number, it's a lot easier to approach it and fix stuff. And so it's not a case of, click through this page and the next page and the next page, and oh my goodness, there's 10 more pages to go, let's just quit this thing. Let's get it to a manageable number, and then it's easier to actually work on stuff and come up with a plan so that we don't just grow and grow forever in the future. And so we wanted to talk about that plan in front of an audience rather than just implementing it on our own and shocking all of you. Oh, yes, and meaningful labels for every issue. That's long been a goal.
One of the problems we have with GitHub is you can't give a person right to modify the labels without giving them write access to the actual Git repo, which means only few people have the right to modify the tags, and some have been given that right and they promised not to push into the Git repo. It's an unfortunate feature of GitHub that we can't really solve.
Roger, you want to take over?
Okay, good. So one approach to this problem is to think about how valuable the issues are that have been open for a very, very long time and that no one has done anything about. So are they open for a very long time because they're invalid? Are they open because they're valid but no one has had time to look at them? What are the reasons for issues sort of languishing there? And what can we learn about the quality of an issue based on its age? The age itself is not necessarily an indicator that there's something wrong with it, but if nothing has happened on that issue, and by nothing happened, we also mean no one has commented on it. There's been no activity at all saying, yes, I also have this problem, or I have this problem and here are the source files with which you can reproduce this issue, which makes it much easier to fix, right? So in many cases, these are things that have been open so long ago that we're not even sure if they still apply to the toolkit today. And so the open source community has come up with various solutions to this problem. This is not something that we've invented ourselves, but GitHub, in an effort to automate more and more things, has begun to develop a series of automated tools that they provide that people can use on repositories like this, which they call bots. And there is a bot that will review the issues in an issue tracker and tag them with certain labels based on characteristics of the issue. And there is an issue. There's a bot called Stale. The bot is actually called ProBot, and ProBot has a feature or a function called Stale that will look at issues that have not been updated after a certain configurable period of time and add a label to that issue saying, we think this thing is inactive or stale. And there's a grace period there whereby we can define another threshold that says, we're adding this label now to flag this as something that appears to be inactive. If this is important to you, please let us know within a configurable threshold of time, which will be stated then in the issue. So the bot will sort of warn saying, if nothing happens on this in the next, month, then this issue will be closed. And so if you are the original author of this issue, you will be notified saying there has been activity on your issue. And that may be very exciting to you as someone who opened this issue 6 years ago, and you may think, great, they've fixed it. And then you check your notifications and it says, if nothing happens, this is going to be closed. And our hope is that if you are the original author of that issue, that might inspire you to either let us know, actually, this isn't relevant anymore, I'm fine with you closing it, or, no, gee, this is really important to me, please, please, please fix this. And that gives us the opportunity to say, thank you, dear human, for letting us know that this is still important to you, because we hadn't noticed that recently. Can you provide us with more information, the test case, or whatever it is that we need to fix things? So we're hoping that this will allow us to reduce the number of open issues in the backlog that don't mean anything to anyone. And this is not because we don't want to fix anything at all, but because with the limited resources we have, we'd really like to focus our efforts on the things that actually mean something to someone and the things that we're really capable of fixing. And so that's our idea.
Yep. So once we run this bot, that's what our issue tracker is going to look like. Clear the field. Yes? No, maybe not quite like that. So we do want to try to implement ProBot by the end of the year. One of the reasons to announce it like this is to get feedback on that. Certainly we didn't want to go in and have everybody be shocked without any announcement that half the issues had disappeared, something like that. But yeah, probably I think the plan is that a 2-year grace period, not grace period, that's not the right thing, but 2 years of inactivity, that would be the configurable time, which is, I think, quite a while. So yeah, we would likely be closing off the ones that have been open for 6 years that haven't had any activity. And again, that may still mean the issue exists, but if no one's looked at it in 6 years and it's not likely anyone's going to be looking at it soon, there's no reason to keep it in there as a distraction. That sort of makes everything else harder to find.
Yeah, okay. And this is that threshold is debatable. That's one of the things that we wanted to raise with you today. I think this is kind of a standard question for any sort of questions of content lifecycle, right? So those of you that work in an enterprise content management environment or something are familiar with the notion of what to do with stale content, right? I manage a large Confluence instance at eBay where I'm responsible for taking care of making sure that really old stuff disappears after a certain amount of time. And we spent a lot of time at eBay thinking about how to solve that problem best. And we implemented basically an automated archiving solution there for the wiki pages as well that say if no one's touching them and no one's viewing them, at some point they're worthless. So something that has been created 10 years ago and never updated since may still be critical if it's being viewed every day, because the information may still be as valid as the day it was created. But if it hasn't been updated and isn't being viewed, nobody needs it. And the way we implemented that policy there was we started with a very broad threshold and said we have 50,000 pages in the instance. Let's throw everything out that's older than 5 years and no one's looked at. That gets rid of a few things. If people come at us with pitchforks, we'll stop there. But then if people say, no, this is actually getting better, then we start throwing things away that are 4 years old, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year. So we're down to a year now. The content of search results is getting much better because the stuff that's in the system is good. And so that's kind of the approach I would take here. We would start with a fairly large threshold that doesn't sound too scary to everyone. And if that seems to work well, we might tighten the screws bit by bit. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud right now, but...
So Probot will close the issue, which means it's closed, but it's not deleted. And it will also mark that issue as closed by Probot with some label. So there's a record that an automated system closed this. One of the things I was somewhat worried about was that when people come in and file a new issue, they should first check if that issue has been raised before, if it's a known issue. And usually you only search the open issues for possible duplicates. So now you would need to also search the closed, but by Probot. I don't have a solution for that, because we can't influence the way people search for duplicates. But the data is still there. We're not throwing anything away.
I would suggest that if it's closed by this automated process, if it happens to be a duplicate of something new, it doesn't matter because the new thing should be sufficient to define and solve the problem.
Well, it should be. That was one of the things we discussed. I mean, the only way the older one would be useful is if we had done diagnosis in there.
Right.
And had gotten, okay, well, it's going to take this and this to fix it, or maybe we have other sample files. But yeah.
But I would expect in that case that, like,
Someone's
let's say
probably
you were
gonna
the
remember
one who did that diagnosis, when you get the notification that this is going to be taken, you say, oh yeah, I worked on that. Let's not throw this one away.
Yep.
Coders usually remember 2 weeks of things.
Yep.
If I work on something, come back. If it's more than 2 weeks, I have no recollection of that code. So in that same way, we will not remember that this has been reported before, or I even debugged this for a week at some point, unfortunately.
But in discussing that, we seem to have the feeling that that case where someone opens a new issue for something that was reported a long time ago is actually itself a valid data point.
Yep.
Because it means that someone still cares about that now, cares enough to open an issue. And if they open an issue that is of relatively low quality in the sense that they say, something broke, but don't really say much, that will at least trigger something on our radar, and those of us that work with this a little bit more closely might then be inclined to go back and search and say, didn't we have something like this? And then perhaps we find that old issue that got closed, that had a test case, and we can always close the new one, reopen the old one, and say, this is the one we're going to track. So we recognize that that's a challenge of this approach, but it didn't seem to us to be a reason not to do this at all.
Yes.
I wonder if 2 years is a little bit too brief a time. I was just remembering Leif Erikson's comment earlier, and I just asked her now. 185 was released in 2014. It's got the highest number of downloads. Presumably, there's a number of issues against it. Is it possible that that number could be moved back to, say, 4 years or 3 years, and then see if people are, because so many people are using 185, they might want those bugs fixed?
That's slightly different topic, I think. That is bugs against older releases, and realistically, none of us are going to implement any fix for 185.
I understand that you're not going to fix 185. That was the point. The point was whether or not the time was too far back for even a current release or a more recent release. The thinking that maybe something that was part of an older version of the product had been moved forward into a current version and might still be an existing issue. Not that you're going to fix a 185 problem.
Okay.
I think that that's a good point, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to have this discussion here with you and not just decide to do it amongst ourselves. I think if we had had a little bit more time last week and not had like some other stuff that we wanted to get done this week, we could have prepared a slide that showed you the numbers for each of them. If we close everything that's older than 6 years, this is what our number will look like. If we close 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, this is what our numbers will look like. Maybe if we look at those numbers, we'll see some kind of a sweet spot that says, this is the conservative approach that would allow us to, tighten the screws later, but start with something that's helpful. So 2 years was just kind of something that we came up with. It's not decided yet, I would say.
It's also that if someone has filed an issue against 2.2, for example, then it's about to be closed. If the person who filed that issue doesn't want to go back and verify that it still exists in the latest version, then we probably want to fix that. But if they go back, verify that it still exists, the bug still exists in the current version or the current stable version, then there's activity on that issue, and then the automatic close operation will not go forward.
I'll also comment that we mentioned earlier there have been a lot of fixes for old things that went into the 3.1 hotfixes, and not considering that this would come in the future, I kind of shot our team in the foot a bit, because on a lot of older issues, I added comments to say this still exists in 3.1, and I attached a bunch of sample files to some of them because I created sample files when there were some missing, if I could try to reproduce it. So I did a lot of that. So a lot of those older ones actually got some activity, which I now somewhat regret. But it is what it is.
But I think that's an important thing to underscore here, is that this is not just a brute force approach to get rid of things. It's just an effort at reducing things. And activity can mean any number of things. So activity can mean a simple comment that says, this is still important to me. Ideally, it would be a comment that says, this is still important enough to me that I'm actually willing to help you try to figure this out. And I just tested and it still happens, or here's the map that breaks this, or something like that. But, even just saying I still care will be treated as activity.
Yes.
One suggestion to make life a little bit easier is, I believe that at the moment the project does not have a template for when issues are raised. If you could actually raise a template saying, and you must provide a DITA map, and you must explain what the blah blah, and you must say which version it is.
It does
should
now.
Yeah, it does already. Okay.
It does now. I don't remember when that was added, Roger. You did most of that, I think.
Well, I think within the past year we've added that, so we have separate templates for bugs and feature requests, and each of them request different things.
Okay.
So the template is there, and it asks for things like how are you running, what operating system, what toolkit version. Describe the problem. Does it come up
when you raise the issue?
Yes.
So you've got the right name for it, so it actually recognises it, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
So, okay, not funny. And personally, in disagreement with my colleague here, I would close everything which isn't already 3. Because if you've not got if the support matrix is latest version only, then you can be much more aggressive about saying get rid of it, or at least let the bot run, and then let people squeal, because if they squeal, then it will be a new version.
So I'm just bringing that up so you can see what it's like now. If you try to open a new bug report, you get the template, asks you for expected behavior, actual behavior, if you have a possible solution, how to reproduce test case, please attach your test case, and then info about how you're running it. Now, us asking for all of this in a template doesn't mean that everyone provides it. And it doesn't mean that everyone coming here is going to understand what we mean when you say DITA-OT version. Some of them might say, I'm using the version in Oxygen, or I'm using the one that my team gave me. So we don't always get the info, but since this template came in, I think at least to us who see a lot of these, the quality of the issues has significantly improved. And by quality, I just mean the ease of us understanding what's going wrong and reproducing it.
This is one of our standard answers also to the question that comes up invariably at DITA-OT Day every year, the question, how can I help? One way that you can help is to help us monitor the issue tracker. And if something comes in that you have a comment on, or you can provide some insight on, that's a real low threshold way of helping us out and saying, yes, I've seen this too. That kind of help is quite appreciated, because sometimes a lot of these things come in at once and we may not, have time to.
I'd like to mention Stefan has done that a bunch of times. Yeah. I've seen comments or the little likes or.
I think it's quite important because many of us include the DITA-OT in our product. So basically any issue with the DITA-OT translates to the product in the end. So you should be aware of the problems, and if someone opens an issue with a problem and we can test it, and sometimes Radu does that, so and some other people from our company too, because it reflects to our product in the end. So more of us can do that basically and help with this acknowledged part. This it works with this version. It's okay with that version, and so on.
And you can go in if you see a new feature that you would like or an issue that you'd like fixed, because remember, this number is not just bugs. It's also feature requests, some of them quite obscure, some of them quite large in scope. So it's a wide variety of things that are in there. But if you go in and you have a GitHub account, you can click the little thumbs up on issues. And a lot of projects use that as a way to judge importance of the issues and priority. If a lot of people are giving something thumbs up, it's something to pay attention to. We haven't done that much, but a number of the issues have gotten that kind of attention. So that's another way to, I'm guessing that counts as activity on the issue too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just want to say, as one of the person who probably generates a lot of these issues, and I don't solve as many as I wish I had the time to help solve, I think this is an excellent idea, and I support it. I would vote for 2 weeks. not older than 2 weeks, but 2 weeks before it gets marked as closed. Right. Simply because, like, if I get a notification of an issue that I submitted, which I wouldn't be surprised if I'm responsible for a number of those that are 8 years old. If I see it and I don't respond in those 2 weeks, I'm never going to respond. Yeah. Right? Because I'm going to have forgotten by week 3 that even happened. So making it a month, I don't think would improve anything.
Yep. Unless you're on vacation and then read all your email when you get back.
I don't get 2 weeks of vacation.
Oh, that's right. You work in the U.S. We're in Europe here.
Yeah.
My boss is a real asshole.
So this has sort of been covered. How do you get more attention? You're a lot likely to get more attention or more results if you can provide all the details in the template. If we're looking at 2 different issues and one of them looks full of details and is floating nicely with everything you need to get going, which one of these are you going to do? The one that doesn't give you support or the one that's already supporting you? That was kind of the idea here. And that's the last slide. Do we have anything else to add? Any other questions, comments about this process? Yes.
Do each of you have a gut feel of what the magic number might be for you?
I think we sort of averaged on 2 years. That's what we came here with, but otherwise.
Number of issues in the backlog.
Oh, that's another interesting way to do it. Kick off the old ones whenever it hits that number. No, I don't know.
Well,
I mean, ideally 0. That's what you're supposed to have.
From a real minority position here, this is going to be really, really revealing. But I can tell you how I like to handle it for the docs repository. I like to have only 1 page of open issues, so I like to try to keep it like around 20. It won't work for the core repository that way.
No, it won't. And that's part of the problem with having both feature requests and bug fixes, because in a lot of the DevOps models, you're supposed to do the bugs first and get 0 bugs. Like, you shouldn't have any bugs in there. They should be closed out first. But we've got this huge mix of features, and again, some of them are trivial small features or are only of interest to one person, so they haven't been implemented. But some of them are huge, and Jarno's not going to do them. I'm not going to do them. Somebody might. That's why they've remained open. But this is kind of a way to address those as well. But yeah, if you're just looking at a number, it's hard to consider it with that in mind. That we could get a lot of feature requests that are sure they're valid features. It's just that none of us are going to work on them.